Hello and welcome to episode 92 of Two Chairs Talking, a little podcast that's co-hosted by me, Perry Middlemas, and my long-suffering, literate, ebullient friend, David Grigg. Hi, David.
Hi, Perry.
How's things?
So instead of running out of adjectives, you decided to just keep adding them.
Yeah, I just start throwing them in and see how you go.
It works.
It's a bit like throwing mud at a wall. Sooner or later, some of it will stick.
Something's got to stick, yeah.
David.
That's right.
So if I keep using enough adjectives, maybe one of them will be applicable. Ha ha, no, that's all right. Right. No, we all know that you are long-suffering because you have to deal with me, so that's
quite all right.
I don't know how you do it, David. I just don't. How have you been?
Oh, pretty good. Nothing particularly exciting happening recently, which sometimes is good. There's nothing exciting, so I think that's all to the good. But just a very quiet life, really.
Well, we all had something very interesting happen to us over the weekend, David.
Well, yes,
I don't know about you, but for the first time ever in my life, I experienced a King's birthday weekend as opposed to a Queen's birthday weekend.
Yes.
Not that I'm a monarchist at all. I'd rather we were a republic. But it is interesting that I've got to the stage of 68 years, or close to 68 years of age, and first time ever that at this time of year the monarch's different.
Yeah, and of course it's not his birthday at all.
No.
It wasn't her birthday either.
No.
In fact, I think it was her father's birthday.
Was it?
Yeah.
I think it was just...
Who would be George the Sixth? Yeah, George the Sixth.
Gazetted as a birthday, thrown in, seems like a reasonable thing. But I don't know, they should change it, give it to something else. When the first up against the wall when the revolution comes, that sort of stuff. There's going to be the King's birthday weekend. No,
yeah, well, at least it's not Boris Johnson's birthday.
Which is good. Yeah,
which is good.
That. Yeah. So, what else have you been up to?
Very little, really. Just being here and doing stuff. I've been doing some more work for Standard Ebooks. I've backed off in one way and got a bit further into it in another. I sort of backed off and resigned, if you like, from the editorial panel.
Yep.
Which is the panel that sort of reviews other people's work and acts as a tutoring to new producers on Standard Ebooks. And I've decided that I'm getting too old for that stuff, and I'm forgetting some of the stuff that I ought to know. So I figured that it was probably time to step down from that. But I'm still working on my years-long project of producing The Life of Johnson by Boswell, which is...
I don't know how you can do it.
I've gotten through now, I think, 6,000 italics, and I'm currently working through the instances of all capitals, of which there are I think there are only about 2,500 of those, so that won't take me as long. So
oh dear!
Each one has to be looked at individually, so it takes a while.
Yes. I don't envy you. I don't envy you.
One of these days I'll get to start reading the book itself.
Oh, okay.
But I haven't done that yet.
It's pretty interesting when you're proofreading a book and you're not actually reading it.
Well, I'm not proofing it. All I'm doing is picking up these instances of italics, semanticating them to is this italic representing a book, or is it represent a play, or is it a poem?
Oh, okay.
And some of that requires a bit of research. You sort of just get this title and you think, well, what the heck's that? And you sort of do your research on Wikipedia or wherever, and it's a play. All right, so you mark it as a play.
Okay.
And off you go to the next one.
All right, okay. Yeah, so you've he just threw italics around willy-nilly and you have to try and determine which category they fit into.
Yeah, our policy is to try and tag them appropriately so that future researchers or whatever can determine what's being talked about. It's all helpful.
Good. Okay, makes sense. Yeah. I've got back into doing a bit of work on Wikipedia. I don't know whether I discussed this sometime a few years ago on the podcast, but I got asked to help out with Lee Harding's wiki page, which I did, and then found that somebody else said, this particular page needs a fair bit of work because it looks like it's going to be deleted, and so I had to get to work on doing that, and that's taken a little bit of time, and it sort of dragged me back in, David. Yet another little project to do while I'm retired. So I'm back in again. And
so you're ready for the wars between the deleters and the adders, whatever, the inclusionists and the exclusionists?
Yeah, exclusionists and inclusionists. Well, no, I don't want to, as much as I possibly can, I'm going to try and avoid that stuff, because I just find that it's a complete drain on energy, for one thing. It sort of removes the your will to live after a while, and it also just takes up a huge amount of time for which you gain absolutely nothing, other than the fact that we're back where we were. And, you know, I just wish people would sort of go with the idea that, yeah, okay, look, some of the pages aren't up to scratch. Give people enough time to get it together. Whereas the one that I got asked to do some work on, I had 5 days in which I had to get the page up to scratch and do all of the research and all the background stuff on it. Otherwise, the editor was threatening to take it for a discussion about deletion. And once it gets down to that point, then it starts becoming a real bun fight, because they said, we said, is he notable? Is he not? You know, and all this sort of stuff. And even so, with the little bit of work that I did on this particular page, it's quite obvious to me that some of these editors just don't like being told, well, frankly, this person is notable in this particular field. The fact that you don't think the field's of much interest is neither here nor there. It's got to be a situation where if there's enough things going on, then, and there's enough references, then you have to allow for the fact that this person is notable. And, you know, so then I realised there was another one that was closely aligned to this guy. Well, both of these guys are science fiction fans in the United Kingdom. And I thought there was another one that needed a bit of work. And so I had to get onto that and get that one started. And that one's not quite finished, but it's cleared up a fair bit. And of course, once you start getting into that, then you think, oh, well, I might as well go off and do something else and have a look. Wonder what's been happening while I've been away for 6 or 7 years. And it just drags you back in. You know, it's like that line out of Scarface. I thought I was out, but I keep on getting dragged back in. And but I'm going to restrict myself to a smaller subset of the whole of the encyclopedia and deal mainly with things like Australian literature and things of that ilk. And so that it's a fairly non-contentious area, because as long as you have, as long as you stick to correct formats and correct layouts, and you've got enough references, and so that people can look at it and go, well, okay, I can understand that if you're saying that this thing won a particular award, that you've got a link to somewhere that says that it actually did win the award, that you're saying that it was published in these 3 or 4 different editions, that yes, those 3 or 4 different editions do exist. And that you're not making up any original research, and you put all that in together, and yeah, it takes a little bit of time. But yesterday and today, I threw together a page for Jane Harper's book, The Lost Man, and that's obviously a notable book because it won a Ned Kelly Award and International Thriller Writers Award and a Martin Beck Award, which is the best award given for the best translated crime novel for a particular year in Scandinavia. And so, you know, won plenty of things. Just nobody has either taken the time or had the energy to actually do that stuff. So there aren't very many people working in that particular area. And since I've been back, there's already 2 people come in and sent me a message saying, oh, it's good to see you back again.
That's good.
I'm really glad that somebody's back helping out, because obviously they've been carrying the can for the last 6 or 7 years. And it's just worthwhile going in and doing a bit of work. And I mean, I would, as while I've had some bad experiences there. You know, not disastrous, just annoying to the extent that I just didn't want to deal with that sort of stuff anymore. That coming back into it again and working in a small sort of cliquey area where there isn't much contention. It's actually not bad. You actually feel as though you're doing something, although it chews up a lot of time, David.
Oh yes, well it's the same with my stuff. Yeah, the standard ebook stuff. It just eats up a lot of time.
Well, it's just the same way as if you just go into Wikipedia at any time and you think, oh, well, just follow a few of these links. 3 hours later, you've read a heck of a lot of stuff, learned a fair bit, but you've used up a lot of time. And it's the same with editing. But time is what we've got, David.
Indeed.
That's what we've got a lot of. But anyway, enough of that. Enough of the general natter that we normally do at the front. Let's get on with a bit of news, shall we?
News, all right.
Well, I've got a few bits of news for you, David. The first one of these is that friend of the podcast, W.H. Chong, has won a major book award just recently.
Excellent.
He won the best non-fiction cover at the Australian Book Design Awards, and he won it for his book Childhood by Shannon Burns. It's a autobiography written by Shannon Burns about his life growing up in Elizabeth in South Australia. I have started a bit of it, but had to put it down for various reasons, like reading for this podcast and for various other things. But I shall get back to it again. It looks a bit harrowing, to be frank, but I think that it might be an interesting read. It sounds like he came from a very tough background in Elizabeth, in South Australia, which was a working class suburb. There was a big car manufacturing yard there, and a lot of, and I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, but purely and simply because that's the description that a lot of people use, a lot of £10 poms. If you recall the £10 passage for English immigrants are.
You better be careful, Perry. I'm a £10 pom.
Well, there you are. So a lot of them ended up, if they went to South Australia, ended up in Elizabeth, because a lot of them came to stay in hostels, and they were out in that particular area on the northern side of the city, and then they moved into the nearby area, as happens. I mean, it's the same thing happens to a lot of the Vietnamese refugees that came into Melbourne. They went to living in the Housing Commission flats in at Richmond and moved to Victoria Street just to open their restaurants. And the reason why they did that was because there was a whole lot of people that wanted to eat that type of food were living in that area, namely other refugees.
Of course.
And so you live in the area that you know and that your friends are in. And so that's where they stayed and where they came from. Jimmy Barnes from Cold Chisel came from there as well. And so that's it would have been a fairly tough background, a fairly tough neighbourhood, but good to see that Chong's picking up awards. Always good to see one of our friends doing well.
Indeed.
In the science fiction area, the Arthur C. Clarke Award shortlist has been announced. This is for the best book published in the United Kingdom, science fiction book published in the United Kingdom, well, excuse me, in the year before, so in 2022. Now, the shortlist consists of 6 books, and they are Venomous Lump Sucker, good title, by Ned Bowman, The Red Scholar's Wake by Elliot de Bodar, Pluto Shine by Lucy Kissick, The Anomaly by Hervé Letellier, translated by Adriana Hunter. I think that's been translated from the French, but don't quote me on that one. The Coral Bones by E.J. Swift, and Metronome by Tom Watson. Now, of those, the Elliot de Bodar is the only one that I've actually ever heard of, David. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of that. The winner will be announced on August the 16th. Generally speaking, the winner of the Arthur C. Clarke Award is nothing less than interesting, and some of them are absolutely fantastic.
Yes,
so
that's very true.
I will. They do have a tendency to pick up novels that are not necessarily what you would classify as being strictly mainstream, and so they're sort of off to one edge, and so or other. And so I think that it's always worth having a look at and seeing what they're doing. Now, the other thing that we've got is that the Aurealis Awards, recognising the best in Australian speculative fiction, were announced recently. Now, there are a large number of these awards, and I'm not going to go through the whole lot of them because I'll be here forever. Yeah. I'll just give you but they give awards for in the categories of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and I think young adult.
Yep.
The best science fiction novel was 36 Streets by T.R. Napper. The best fantasy novel, Path of Thorns by Angela Slatter. Best horror novel, The Stone Road by Trent Jamieson. Haven't read any of them.
No, me neither.
And the last piece of news I have, David, is that as of this podcast recording, we haven't as yet seen the 2023 Hugo Ballot, which I would have thought would have been out by at least by about now, but hasn't put it in appearances yet. The word that I'm hearing at the moment is that it will probably be released by the end of June. Now, that still should be okay. It's pretty late, but it still should be okay because the convention is not until October, and if they allow the Hugo Award voting to run through until early September, you'll get 2.5 months in which to read everything. So that's not bad in general. That's a lot better than a lot of other prizes who only give you, or awards only give you 2 or 3 weeks, which isn't anywhere near long enough. But at least this way, I always like it out a bit earlier than it's come out at the moment. But we have to put it down to the fact that, they maybe are having trouble getting either the okay from the various nominees to appear on the ballot, because that's what they have to do first off, and secondly that I don't know, there may be stuff in translation. Who knows? I just don't know.
It's
anyway,
going to be very interesting.
It will be very interesting. I mean, I can absolutely and utterly guarantee you one thing, David. There will be one thing on the ballot without fail. And that is in the best dramatic presentation. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once will be on that ballot. I can absolutely guarantee you. I'm not going to bet, but I'm going to guarantee you that it will be. Because I think that, well, not only do I think...
Surprising if it's not, that's for sure.
Well, it will be. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be. And given that we're talking about an Asian Worldcon and it has a very strong Asian influence in this particular film, I just can't see why it won't be.
Yeah,
Makes
sure.
no sense.
And it would be well deservedly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not... I think I extolled the virtues of the film on this particular podcast at various times, and I've been telling a lot of people to go out and see it. And so many people that come to me and say, I don't understand any of that. Didn't like it. I got 20 minutes in, I hated it. I turned it off. Well,
never mind.
Mate, if you got 20 minutes in, it's only just getting started. And really, in the first 20 minutes, there really isn't a lot to hate. So I'm not terribly sure how you go if you get, when it gets full on multiverse later on. But for a lot of these things, if people that whose opinion you're trusting are basically saying you really should go out and see this film, maybe it's not a bad idea just to sit down and see it. And just, and it's all available on streaming now, so you don't even have to go out to the cinema to watch it, but just sit and watch it and just let it flow over the top of you. Far too many people basically get there and go, I don't understand anything about what's going on, and therefore I just don't like it. Well, just let it come to you and let it go over the top and then come out the other end and go, well, don't think it worked, or yeah, it was good and it was quirky and enjoyed it, bits of it. You don't have to enjoy everything about a film. It's like novels, and we're going to talk about a few novels later on in this episode, and you don't like everything about them, but you can come out the other end and say, yeah, it was an enjoyable experience, even if it wasn't the best thing that I've ever done.
Sure.
But as I did say, watching Everything Everywhere All at Once was one of the best experiences I've had in a cinema for quite some time. I had a very, very good time watching that movie.
Excellent.
Anyway.
All right.
Right, so let's move on, shall we?
Let's talk about what we've been reading.
Yes, we're going to be reading. We have been doing a bit of reading lately. And one of the first one that I want to talk about is another in Mick Herron's series of spy thrillers about Slough House. This is the Slow Horses series of novels, and I'm up to the third one here, which I believe you've read as well, David.
I have. We'll chat about it later.
Yes, this is called Real Tigers by Mick Herron. Now, just to run back over what actually happens with this particular series, as I was talking about earlier, this is a series about the denizens or the people that inhabit that establishment known as Slough House. So this is an establishment of the British Secret Service where disgraced intelligence operatives are sent in the hope they'll despair of the work that they're given there, the humdrum, boring work that they're given, and just quietly resign and go away and just not cause anybody any trouble because they've done some bad things or not so good things, but haven't done anything bad enough to actually be sacked. And so they just the authorities just push them off to one side and say, here, do all this boring crap work and just go away. Now, this, by bad things that they've done, they've sort of left, a sort of a laptop on a train, or they've messed up an assignment in which somebody got hurt or injured. And part of the difficulty in sacking somebody is a lot of this stuff could become public, and security services don't want that to happen, so they just quietly shuffle them off to one side. Now, as I also mentioned, that the operatives that work in the Slough House are known as slow horses, and that's what each of them. It's just a play on words for the Slough House, and they're all managed by the outrageous character of Jackson Lamb, who in the TV adaptation is played by Gary Oldman. And I was thinking about this this morning, David, and it sort of struck me that really, in many ways, Gary Oldman's almost playing a parody of the Barry Humphries character Les Patterson. Not quite as gross, but I was thinking, there's a point. Anyway, that just sort of struck me. Maybe not, but anyway. So anyway, Jackson Lamb's a slovenly, sweary, lazy, farty, and general disgusting human being on every particular level. But he's very intelligent, and he, although he proclaims that he hates every single one of the people that he works for him, he's actually pretty loyal to them, and he does actually want them to survive, not necessarily succeed, but he wants them to survive and at least do well. Now, second in charge of the house, Slough House, is a woman by the name of Katherine Standish. She's Lamb's office manager and conscience in the house. And she was relegated there after her patron, who was also her boss and lover, committed suicide before the news came out that he was actually spying for the Russians. So when all this sort of was discovered, and he was discovered with his brain splattered all over the bathroom wall, she was shuffled off because was basically considered that she was tainted. And she was actually an alcoholic at the time, but has since reformed and given up and dried out. But she was shuffled off to Slough House to work with Lamb, and then she was going to be forgotten. Now, the reason why I bring her up is that she's been a sort of semi-major character through the rest of these particular books, but in this one, she actually takes a leading role in the first part of it, because the novel starts with her leaving Slough House one night and running into an old lover in the street. Now, normally this might just be an annoyance, but this man, Sean Donovan, has just been released from prison after serving 5 years for involuntary manslaughter. He had crashed his car while he was drunk and killed his fellow passenger. Both of them were members of the military intelligence, and this was rather frowned upon, being drunk and crashing your car and killing somebody. Now, Standish is quick to realise that this, and I put this in inverted commas, chance meeting has nothing to do with chance at all. Though she tries to get to some point of safety, she's snatched off the street very quickly by Donovan and his associates, and so the action of the novel begins. She's held kidnapped. The photos taken of her sent back to River Cartwright, who was the major character of the very first novel in this particular series, and that was called Slow Horses. And he's also appeared in all the rest of the other novels so far. I'm trying to read these three in sequence so that I can keep up with where things are going. But it's probably the best way it goes. So you start to think that the novels all are going to be about Katherine Standish being held kidnapped and what Sean Donovan and his cronies are trying to gain from her kidnapping. well, that's what we think's going to happen. But there's much more to the plot here than you first assume. It seems to be fairly simplistic, but then you realise that we jump around a little bit, and then you find out that there's a major internal managerial battle going on inside the top levels of MI5, and there's a new Home Secretary who's been put in, whose aim is to cripple the Secret Service after they rejected his application some 20 years previously. Now, interestingly enough, this particular politician is described in the book as, he's secretly coveting the PM's job, yeah, which is fair enough, but also seems to have a thatch of unruly blonde hair and who rides a bicycle. Now, I wonder who Mick Herron's basing this particular thing on. Now, this book was written 2016, 2017.
Yeah, it's quite a while.
A certain person that we've already mentioned in this podcast, named Boris Johnson, sort of springs to mind as being the person that's here. And this guy's a nasty, conniving piece of work. And, supposed to get to the top of politics, you pretty much have to be a nasty, conniving piece of work. But anyway, getting back to the book. So the action of the novel slowly winds up and involves complicated plots, both internal and external, of the MI5, conspiracy theories all over, MI5 document warehouses and out-of-control operatives, both inside and outside, in Slough House and everywhere else. And it all ends in a marvellous set piece that comes across as a runaway episode of the X-Files crossed with the Wild Bunch, where there's guys getting shot all over the place. And it's fantastic stuff. And it features improbable confrontations and even more improbable escapes. I thought it was fantastic and probably the best of the series so far. And it's really interesting to see Herron grow as a writer here. The plots are becoming more convoluted. The books, they're funnier. I'm actually getting laughs out of these things.
Quite funny.
Every now and again, something crops up. You just can't stop yourself from laughing because it's just such a brilliant face. His base level phrases, every now and again, he just throws something in and it just cracks you up. And the characterisations are better as well and getting deeper and deeper. You're getting a lot more background. And you get a lot more of the interactions. And he's really getting stuck into it in a big way. And, oh, God, sometimes you read some of the stuff that Jackson Lamb says. He said, well, it's not politically correct, but geez, it's funny. And this is all very, very good stuff indeed, David. And I can only recommend their stuff and people should be reading it. And I'm going to keep going one or two books a year, I reckon, until I catch up, because you've got to keep in front of the TV series, and this is wonderful, just great.
Yes, I'm sort of binge reading them too. In fact, I'll just let you know I finished the fourth book, which I won't tell you anything about because there are spoilers. But I will say that even to this point, it's a little bit Games of Thrones in that you shouldn't get too attached to any one of these characters. Okay, all of whom are really, really interesting people, and the characterization is wonderful. I'm very fond of Katherine Standish and her internal struggles against lapsing back into being an alcoholic.
I thought that was very well handled.
She's a very impressive woman all around. And she's actually often the most competent person in the building.
Oh yes.
And so she's really, really excellent, and so I like her a great deal. But yeah, a great series, I say. But I'm like Perry. I'm sort of working my way through them. I probably wait a while before I read the fifth book, but I've just finished the fourth one, which is called Spook Street. Which is excellent too, of course.
All right, okay. Well, there's also a couple of novellas been thrown into the middle.
There are a number of novellas out there too, which I must get to. Yeah.
So I read one out of sequence, which I think I spoke about a while back. I read that one earlier this year, but I am going to try and track down the others. I would presume that the library would be pretty happy to have these books in, because I would think that, especially now that the TV adaptation's out there and doing so well, and yes, we are telling people, go and watch the first two, but watch them in sequence, watch the first series, then watch the second one, because they're very good, reasonably faithful adaptations.
Yeah, but having you say that, I had some criticisms after I read the second book of what they put into the second TV series. And there were a couple of items in that second season which are just absolutely not in the book. And I thought, well, maybe they've brought something forward from a later book, but it must be a very much later book in the series, because I haven't seen anything which fits into that category. The whole business in the second season of the TV series, there's this guy somewhere outside of London who's a Russian guy who's going to be a Russian leader or whatever, and he gets poisoned by radioactive pellet. It's nowhere in the book. It hasn't been anywhere in the first 4 books. No idea where that comes from.
All right. Maybe they are setting up something for further on down the track.
Maybe, don't know.
I don't know. Maybe Herron throws in something in book number 5 or 6 to go back to this particular time.
Well, I'd be interested to see if that actually happens, but it hasn't happened so far. So I'm interested.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they're an interesting bunch of people to follow along with. The plots are quite interesting and quite engaging. The novel was just fantastic to read. I mean, I was running up against it. Thought, I'm going to have to struggle to finish this. I did not struggle to finish it.
I read it in 2 days.
I just sat down and just read, nailed through it last night. Absolutely wonderful stuff. Really, really good.
Yeah, really good.
Some of the most fun books that I'm reading of all at the moment is this particular series.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. All right, now I have a bit of a dilemma, which I'll explain, and that's that obviously between episodes here, I need to read enough books to fit into our category of what we've been reading recently. And because I've been reading a very long book, I've only actually read a couple of books during the last 3 weeks, and one of them was Real Tigers. The other one I'll talk about towards the end of the episode. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I thought I'd go back and I'll look at our wonderful indexes, which are on our website. twochairs.website/indexes, and I picked up a couple of books which I haven't yet talked about on the podcast, but I did read earlier this year or in my case last year. So I'm going to talk about those to fill in space. So here we go. The first one of those is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. Now, given that this is a book intended for readers in their early to mid-teens, opening it with the murder of a whole family doesn't seem like the kind of thing which ought to work. But I think Neil Gaiman does carry it off very effectively. And The Graveyard Book won the British Carnegie Medal and the American Newbery Medal as the best book for children in 2009, and then went on to win the Hugo Award for Best Novel in that year. So it's pretty well regarded. All right, so I'll just do a bit of a summary of the plot. So as the book opens, as I say, it starts with this murder of all these people in the family. So as the book opens, it's nighttime, and the man has already stabbed 3 members of the same family in their own house, wipes the blood off his knife, and heads upstairs to the bedroom of the sole remaining member of the family, a baby, just old enough to be called a toddler. But when he gets there, the child is gone. Disconcerted, the murderer leaves the house and begins searching in the streets. And we don't learn for a long time why these murders have occurred, but we gather from the frantic search by the murderer that it is somehow very important that this lost child also be killed. Now, the child, a boy, has wandered up the hill and into an old cemetery, which is now no longer used for burials, but it's been made part of a nature reserve. And in the graveyard, only able to be seen by his innocent childlike eyes, there's a community of ghosts. The ghosts of the people who have been buried there over many centuries. So, as 2 of the ghosts, Mr. and Mrs. Owens, discover the baby and start to puzzle over why it's there, they're approached by the ghost of the child's mother, freshly dead, who begs them to look after it and keep it safe. So they quickly hide the baby in their tomb from the murderer who comes looking for it. After he's given up and gone away, the ghost of the community debates the matter of whether to allow this living creature to dwell among them, the dead. But they eventually agreed to do that, and Mr. and Mrs. Owens adopt the child. But since they don't know its name, they call it Nobody Owens, and this name becomes Bod for short. And when Bod is a little older, he's also taken in hand by Silas, who we can interpret as being a vampire, neither living nor dead. But he's not a ghost, but he dwells at the cemetery too. And he agrees to become the child's guardian, because Silas is the only entity able to come and go from the graveyard to bring food and other necessities for the infant. And much of the interest and amusement of the book is about the child's rearing and education by the community of ghosts, most of whom date from the 18th century or earlier. And I was very amused by the fact that individuals among these ghosts are often introduced by the epitaph engraved on their headstones. So we have Miss Letitia Borrows, spinster of this parish, who did no harm to man all the days of her life. Reader, can you say likewise? Miss Borrows teaches Bod grammar and composition. His education, therefore, is very unusual as well as being very much out of date. So as well as learning ordinary lessons, the ghosts try to teach him ghostly skills like fading and dream walking, skills which ultimately prove very useful indeed. Bod also becomes friendly with a young witch buried in unconsecrated ground outside the boundary of the cemetery. I think actually the novel started with a novella which was based around this young witch, but anyway, that's not to the point at the moment. Anyway, Bod's life is far from entirely safe. There are ghouls who try to carry him off. There's a mysterious ancient entity called the Sleer, which inhabits an ancient burrow under the hill. And most of all, there's the man who murdered Bod's human family, who's still searching for him in order to kill him, and the evil organisation behind the murderer. And that, of course, there is ultimately a deadly confrontation between all these entities. So look, I liked it a lot. It's a clever concept, well carried through, plenty of interest and tension. I'm sure kids would love it. I should say that the edition I read from HarperCollins is wonderfully illustrated by Chris Riddle. In fact, it's part of a box set all illustrated by Chris Riddle. And the other books in that set, if you want to get out and get it, are Coraline and Fortunately the Milk. Well worth having. Yeah, I liked it a lot.
Yep, I agree. I read this a long time ago. Didn't he base it on The Jungle Book by Kipling?
Yeah, I suppose there are
sort of the
like
basic
that.
idea.
Yeah. The child raised by wolves. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sort of saying that it's exactly the same, but it's sort of
it's a good parallel. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it's a good parallel.
It's a parallel thing in the sense of doing it in a fantastical world. And I thought it was excellently done. I really enjoyed it. I'd read a few things of Gaiman's prior to that, and maybe, but I thought that and some of his later works like The Ocean at the End of the Lane were quite excellent.
Yeah, in fact, really, the stuff he writes for younger readers, I think, is probably better than his stuff for adult readers.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And this one in particular is certainly one. If people haven't read it, they should go out and have a look at it. It's certainly worth your time.
Yeah, absolutely, a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. My next book is a book called The Witness for the Dead by Katherine Addison from 2021. Now, I was impressed with Addison's previous book, The Goblin Emperor, from 2014, when I read it a few years back, and so I was looking forward to this new book. I thought that it was going to be a direct sequel, but it's not exactly that. It's set in the same fantasy world and does use some of the same periphery characters from the earlier novel, but it doesn't involve the Emperor. Now, that first novel followed the ascension to the throne of the youngest half-goblin son of the Emperor after he, the Emperor, and his three legitimate sons have been killed in an accident. Now, when I read that, that first sequence, because that sequence about the Emperor and his sons being killed all together in an accident, I think they were in a flying machine together, and it crashes and they all die. I thought, nah. That's not right. You don't do that. You just don't do that. You don't have the monarch and the heirs all flying together at any one time ever because of just such a problem. And I thought, maybe Addison hasn't quite got it right here, and she's going to mess this up. But once you got past that particular hitch, if you like, the rest of the novel was pretty damn good, and I really, really enjoyed it. So Maya, the name of the Emperor, has to weave his way through the tangled mess of throne room plots and, the high city sycophants and throne aspirants to get to a point where he can feel safe from all the plots that are going on around him and all the threats, and sit securely on the throne, which he finally ends up doing. And it's a terrific book. It's very, very well done. Very much palace intrigue, but with enough fantastical pieces to it to just give you a little bit of a hint of how things were going. It's really just this is really a world where there's a little bit of fantastic in it. It's mainly that there's different races, goblins and elves in this that look very similar, able to interbreed, but it's not over the top. So you're not getting sort of smashed around with dragons and huge amounts of magic here. It's just a fantastical world where this particular this particular author is trying to work through some themes. And anyway, in this particular book, the prelate, and I'll have to try and pronounce this because you know what fantasy novels are all like, David. They're always trying to make it hard for you to wrap your laughing gear around some of the names they give you. Anyway, the prelate here is called Thara Selahar. I think that's right. This was the person who was previously commissioned by that new emperor after the death of his father and half-brothers. And he was commissioned to investigate the death. Now, this particular prelate acts as a witness for the dead, performing the role of advocate for them to ensure they can be laid to rest properly. Now, he has the power to be able to interrogate the soul of a dead person, so long as he can get to the body within a day or two of the death, to get their side of the story, find out how they died. And so basically they act like a fantastical coroner, if you like, and detective, all rolled into one. So not a bad idea, good concept, and worthwhile working through. In this particular novel, Selahar is called in to investigate the death of a young identified woman who's been found in a river. He's now moved away from the Emperor's palace capital to a provincial town of Emilo, and he's just basically, or Amalo, anyway, don't know, another one I can't pronounce. So he's out there doing some work. And so he's called in to investigate this particular death. Everybody seems to think it's either suicide or accident. But he's not really necessarily convinced that it's one or the other, and he's just keeping an open mind about it all. And what we end up here with is a novel that's set in a fantastical world where the detective can interrogate the recently dead. As I said, good concept. It's an enjoyable novel, though not to the high standard of the author's previous outing. But there's a lot to like about Selahar and the world he inhabits. And it looks like being the first in a new series by this author, so it'll be interesting to see where this one runs. So it's a cross between sort of fantasy and a detective novel. If handled well, can be very interesting. If handled poorly, not so great. But I think this one's got a lot of possibilities, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Addison does with this in the next few books.
Yeah.
See how it goes.
Okay. All right. I'll go on to my next book then, which... again, this is a book I read last year, but haven't talked about on the podcast yet. And this is All's Well by Mona Awad. Now, this is one of those books that's got all sorts of praises and references on the cover from some various prominent authors and so on about how wonderful it is. But it didn't quite work for me. But it was entertaining enough. So I'll talk about it and you'll see for yourself. So it's the book is told from the first-person point of view of Miranda Fitch. And she's a one-time Shakespearean actor who, after a disastrous accident when she fell off the stage, she's been reduced to working as a drama teacher at a small liberal arts college. Now, following her accident, which broke several bones, Miranda is in constant pain and has seen a series of doctors and physiotherapists, none of whom seem able to help, and several of whom seem to have made things worse. There's a lot of very pointed commentary here about how chronic pain sufferers are disbelieved and misdiagnosed, particularly if the sufferer is a woman. So I think that's a key part of this story. The college that Miranda is at puts on a Shakespeare play every year, and during Miranda's tenure have performed some of the more popular works such as Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet. But she's tired of seeing the important female roles performed badly by the troupe's lead actress, Brianna, whose parents have contributed many dollars to the maintenance of the theatre course. So, you sort of feel she has to put her in these roles. But this year, Miranda is determined to put on the lesser-known Shakespeare play All's Well That Ends Well, which is a play itself about longing, suffering, and semi-miraculous healing. But the students, led by Brianna, resist this plan strongly and want to put on Macbeth instead. So it's at this point that, desperate with pain and with fury at the students' intransigence, Miranda meets three mysterious men in a bar who seem to know her name and who give her advice, which speaks directly to her unhappy experiences with the medical profession. And this encounter descends into fantasy. There's something very odd about these three people. It's pretty clear, I think, that the author wants us to think of them as the three witches from Macbeth, but certainly that's one reading. They foretell success for Miranda, or will it be her doom? And then we have another literally magical element introduced in the form of herbal potions, read spells, by Ellie, one of the students who has always been on Miranda's side. At one point, Miranda has a physical tussle on the stage with Brianna, who's still having this debate about what they're going to perform. And Brianna's brought in her own copy, her own script of Macbeth. She's really pushing to have Macbeth performed. And so there's this tussle on the stage between Brianna and Miranda. And this ends in Miranda gripping Brianna's wrist tightly. And in doing so, this seems to magically pass on Miranda's sufferings to Brianna. And a later similar struggle with Miranda's current physiotherapist, Mark, also seems to have the same result. Miranda is suddenly no longer incapacitated and seems full of life. Brianna and Mark, however, go into physical declines. Is this transference of pain due to the influence of these three mysterious men, or is it the result of Ellie's potions? Things become more and more confusing towards the end of the book, and that's where it just started to lose me. It becomes hard to figure out where reality lies and fantasy begins, which is not always important, but I felt it was here. Does Miranda really, quote, go to sleep in the sea, end quote, the evening before the first performance? What do her dreamlike experiences mean? I don't know. I would have liked this more, I think, if the author could have lost the three mysterious men and fixed on a single fantasy element, Ellie's potions, driving the plot. But no, it wasn't a bad read.
Okay, yeah, as soon as you were talking about the three mysterious men, I was thinking, yeah, okay, here we go with the witches out of Macbeth, because we've already had that sort of
pricking of my thumbs. Yes.
Yeah, we've had that big flag waved at us already there. Yeah, so you're not supposed to miss those flags, are you?
Interesting spin, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm going to move from the sublime to the inner north of Melbourne, David. With Death in Brunswick by Boyd Oxlade from 1987. So this one's coming up 40 years old, so it's been around a while. Anyway, so in the mid-1980s, Carl is a gormless 37-year-old working as a cook in a seedy, run-down rock and roll club in Brunswick in Melbourne's inner north. He's got mother problems, and as the novel starts, he has, for some fathomless reason, invited her to come and stay with him at his run-down rental property. Now, he's perpetually on the lookout for some easy dope or pills to get him through the day, and he secretly longs for his mother to die so he can inherit her money because he thinks that's the only way he's going to make ends meet. In the meantime, he's pilfering her medications when she isn't looking, and possibly occasionally stealing a bit from her wallet as well. Now, 37 years old, he's like a teenage idiot, really. Now, Carl's separated from his wife, who, in classic Brunswick fashion, has left him for another woman, and now he has to put up with his mother getting on his case about the two of them getting back together again, and Carl basically can't think of anything worse. Now, Carl's really only got one skill. He can cook decent food out of practically anything. And that's a skill he needs to put into constant practice, as the music venue continually messes up the food ordering or just doesn't care, explaining to Carl that he's only kept on due to some quirk in the licensing rules, which require food to be available as alcohol is served late at night. And they're making all their money from the booze. They just have to have somebody out there cooking pizzas or something to make it available, so that whatever, that was the licensing rules at the time. Now, to make matters worse for Carl, Mustafa, who is Carl's kitchen assistant and drug dealer, has been beaten up by the club's bouncers and now isn't coming into work, so Carl's left to do everything all on his own. The bouncers then tell Carl that they don't want drugs dealt on the premises, unless, of course, they are getting a substantial cut of the takings, and have told Mustafa that Carl dobbed him in. And then Carl meets the lovely and very, very young Sophie. She's only in her late teens, and he's 37, as I said earlier, who is working as a waitress in the club. And he's immediately smitten, and she sort of seems to reciprocate. And Kyle finally thinks things are starting to turn for the better for him. That is, until Mustafa comes back to the club one night and confronts Carl in the kitchen over having dobbed him in. A fight ensues, and somehow a kitchen knife ends up firmly stuck between Mustafa's ribs. Exit Mustafa. But what to do about the body? Given what the bouncers have said and his rather drug and alcohol-laden history, Carl has no desire to report this to police because he knows that, there's a fair chance that 20 years to life in prison doesn't sound overly appealing, and that's what's on his plate if he does. So Carl does the only thing he can do. He stores Mustafa's body in the freezer and contacts his one and only friend Dave for help. Now Dave's a cracker, and as it happens, Dave is a gravedigger at the local cemetery and hatches a scheme to put Mustafa's body in the bottom of a recently dug grave, because the funeral was going to be the next day, where it'll be lost forever. Seems like a plan that's going to work. So we get to the one major comic set piece of this novel, the burial in the graveyard. Now, it's a wonderful comic piece of writing, full of deadpan humour with moments of slapstick, goring and disgusting dead body jokes, and I loved it. I thought it was just fantastic. Really just wonderful. Everything's going wrong, but they're still getting there, and they just power on. Unfortunately, it's really the only major piece in the book that does anything like this, and we really needed a few other such sequences to lift this book from the so-so to a rating of excellent. Had possibilities? Doesn't quite get there, unfortunately. Now, this novel was adapted into a film in 1990, so about 3 years after it had been published, from a script by Boyd Oxlade, the original author, featuring Sam Neill as Carl and John Clarke as Dave. Now, Clark's just fantastic in the role of Dave. He's just wonderful.
Yeah, I remember the film.
Oh, and he raises the level of the burial sequence to very high levels indeed. And it's hard to think of anything else in Australian film that is funnier, to be perfectly frank. And it's almost as if the role was written for him. And it's just unfortunate that... actually, I would have preferred a novel about him in some ways, but, this is a humorous book, showing its age a bit. It probably was. It was a big hit back in the late late 80s when it was first published, and of course it ended up spawning just a wonderful film. So that's good for it. It's part of the Text Australian Classics series, with a cover on the edition that I read was from our friend W.H. Chong again. Yeah. And you can obviously see that he's...
referencing the film a bit there.
Yeah, he's referencing the film quite a bit, because he's got Dave with the shovel and Carl looking like something like from American Gothic. The two people standing there together, and Dave looks just like John Clarke. I have to be able to say that while the book was enjoyable, I think the film was better. Yeah. Just one of those ones where all of the stuff that shouldn't have been in the book was left out, and all the good stuff was emphasised, and especially the grave digging sequence, which is just astounding. So it's good stuff, but just be aware of the fact that you're really only getting one big high comic point in it.
Well, that's interesting what you say about the film being better than the book, because I'll have something to say about the end of the discussion of what I've been reading. Now, I said earlier that I've been reading a very long book during the last 3 weeks, and it took a lot of the time. So and that's The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Now, I went out and bought myself a hardcover copy of this book, admittedly a second-hand copy, almost immediately after I finished reading The Secret History, which was Tartt's first novel, which I thought was fantastic. I've been trying to find time to read The Goldfinch for quite a while, but boy, was it worth the wait. So, as I said, it's a very long book, 771 pages in the edition that I bought, and it took me a while to finish. But my interest in the story and the characters never flagged for a moment. The quality of Tartt's writing is so high that it's a joy to read, even if I did keep stopping to marvel at individual sentences and paragraphs that make you a mark. And now, having said that about her quality of her prose, it may make you think that her writing is flowery or pretentiously literary, but nothing could be further from the truth. Her prose is made up of mostly very simple, short words, but she has a talent for writing these long, sometimes paragraph-long, perfectly structured sentences, which just flow like a river in flood, carrying the reader along. I won't be able to help myself. I'll quote an example later on. What about the story, I hear Perry asking? What's the story about?
What about the story, David?
Thank you, Perry. Well, the story is, well, let me say, it's not some esoteric literary confection full of angst and navel-gazing. Nope. In some ways, it's as down-to-earth and gritty as a Raymond Chandler novel. It's a story of terrorism, art theft, drugs and guns, among many other things, of course. All right, what is the story? Well, we start with a short chapter which acts as a prologue. The whole book is told in the first person from the point of view of the narrator, Theodore Dekker. Now, Dekker, in his mid-20s, is in Amsterdam at Christmas time, and for some reason, which we don't find out until much later, he's confined to his hotel room. He barely budges out of the hotel room. And he's cold and he's ill, and he speaks no Dutch, but is obsessively watching local TV, trying to work out what's going on about some sort of crime that he's been involved with. And, of course, much of the rest of the novel is the story of how and why he ended up there. So the real story begins with young Theo at the age of 13. He's in bad trouble at school and has been suspended. And on what turns out to be the most critical day of his life, he's due to attend a disciplinary meeting at the school with his mother. But that meeting is later in the morning, so to fill in time, they wander around New York for a bit and end up in one of New York's major art galleries, where there's an exhibition of classic Dutch painting. One of the paintings in the exhibition is The Goldfinch, painted in 1654 by the artist Karel Fabricius. Now, Theo's mother leaves him for a moment in the room with that painting, but before she returns, something terrible happens. A terrorist organisation sets off an explosion which destroys most of the building. So, without going into too much detail, young Theo survives the explosion. He's knocked unconscious and is covered in rubble and stuff, but he digs himself out. He's okay. He helps a dying old man who's partially out of his mind, and who, in his crazed state, insists that Theo take something. He points to this thing on the gallery floor. Take it. You've got to take it. You must take it. And it's the painting of the Goldfinch, which has been knocked to the floor and its frame broken. Bewildered, Theo puts it in a bag and carries it with him. He sets off through the ruined building trying to find his mother, but he can't. So eventually he returns to their apartment to wait for her there. A spoiler here, she does die in the explosion, and the novel deals at length with Theo's grief and loss, and the feeling which lasts throughout his life that he was responsible for her death, because they wouldn't have been in the art gallery if he hadn't been suspended from school. So the problematic possession of this little masterpiece of a painting, it's a real painting by the way, the possession of this little masterpiece is a thread which runs through the whole story. At first, in the early days, Theo wants to return the painting, but he realizes that he's left it too long. Originally, the authorities thought that it was destroyed in the explosion. But then other missing pieces, which were actually looted from the gallery, start turning up, and they start saying that the Goldfinch was stolen. And so he's too scared to return it. Doesn't want to end up in jail. He's still only a teenager. So there's so much in the novel, it's impossible to summarize without becoming tedious. There's a compelling coming-of-age story as Theo navigates life without his beloved mother. There's a story of a heartbreaking, lifelong, hopeless love. There's alcohol and drugs and guns and violence and antique furniture. Trust me, the story drags you in and it doesn't let you go. So I've been raving about Donna Tartt's prose, so let me at least quote this one sentence, this one long sentence, 300 words long. Theo is in New York at Christmas time, feeling miserable. Here's the quote. I'm hoping I can read this in one breath, we'll see. So, hordes of people on the street, lighted Christmas trees sparkling high on penthouse balconies, and complacent Christmas music floating out of shops. And weaving in and out of crowds, I had a strange feeling of being already dead, of moving in a vaster sidewalk greyness than the street or even the city could encompass, my soul disconnected from my body and drifting among other souls in a mist somewhere between past and present. Walk, don't walk, Individual pedestrians floating up, strangely isolated and lonely before my eyes, blank faces plugged into earbuds and staring straight ahead, lips moving silently, and the city noise dampened and deafened under crushing granite-coloured skies that muffle the noise from the street, garbage and newsprint, concrete and drizzle, a dirty winter greyness weighing like stone. I mean, I'm always in awe of what how she writes. And that's just one instance out of many, many. Gosh, she's a good writer. I'd have to put it down as the best book I've read so far this year, no question.
Okay.
I've already ordered a copy of her second novel, The Little Friend, which I'm looking forward to getting. Now, The Goldfinch won the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for Literature, the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, and several other awards, and was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 30 weeks. Now, here comes the thing about the film. It was made into a film in 2019, directed by John Crowley, but the film is certainly not highly regarded. It gets like 25% on Rotten Tomatoes website, with one reviewer calling it a botch job for the ages and saying it appears to be adapting the Cliff's Notes version of the book instead of the book itself. Ouch.
No.
But the book itself, ignore the film, the book itself is just wonderful, wonderful book.
Well, that would seem to stymie any possibility of a TV miniseries or anything like that. But but you never know. It depends if there's a producer or director out there that's got a real hankering to do it. That maybe they can. Maybe they can push it through.
It might work as a multi-season TV series.
So 700 pages.
701. 771, I should say.
Oh my God! All right. You do know how to pick these really long books, don't you?
I like long books. If they pull you in, I like them.
Well, that's fine. Yeah. Just seems that you can spend a large amount of time reading one particular book for a couple of weeks, and if it's a long book, it better have a good payoff. Is all I can say. So I'm glad this one did for you.
Definitely did. Well, I say the Secret History is the same. Secret History must be at least 600. I've got a copy. You should have a look. 600 pages or so long, and that was the same. It just grabs you and just carries you forward.
Okay.
Good stuff.
She hasn't written all that much, has she?
She's only written 3 books. Well, she only published 3 books, and she seems to have brought them out roughly every 10 years.
Wow.
The Secret History was 1993 or something. Then there was the Little Friend in 2002 or something, and then The Goldfinch, which was 2013. So we're due another one, Perry. We're due another one.
Have you been checking the publishers list to find out?
I've never seen.
I'd be doing some searching. I'd be doing some searching about that.
No word, but by gosh, it would be good. She brought something else out.
All
anyway,
right. Okay. So, sounds like your find of the year.
It was my find of the year. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm done for my books, but I've got we were talking about movies. I've got a movie to talk about, David, and that is The Batman from 2022, last year's DC film about, Batman. Now, there's been a lot of versions of Batman over the years, from the TV series up to Tim Burton, and then all sorts of different people sort of came and went, and then it sort of died away, and then Christopher Nolan grabbed a hold of it and, with his Dark Knight series that had Christian Bale and memorably had Heath Ledger as the Joker in the second film in that trilogy. But this time we have Robert Pattinson, who takes over the Batcape for this latest instalment of this long-running sequence of films. I reckon he does a pretty good job of this. I really do. He got a lot of flack for it, but I don't understand why, because I think everybody just looked at him and said, "Oh, well, basically, he was just a vampire from the
Twilight series."
Twilight series." But so bloody what? The guy can act, and the guy's got the presence that you need, and that's all you're after. So, luckily enough, with this one, the writers and producers didn't decide to reboot the franchise yet again and give us another origin story. That's been just been done to death. You get mentions of it in this, and that's all you need. We know that story. We don't want to do that anymore. Move on. Let's go off and do something else. So here we get hints about it, but the story mainly revolves around Gotham City's underlying corruption, which raises many questions about whether Bruce Wayne's parents were involved, because they were fairly rich, fairly high up in the society, entrepreneurs, donors to a lot of areas, but also politically aware and politically connected. But again, lucidly, the writers of this film don't decide to settle on a straight black and white result, but allow all shades of grey to come to the fore in this particular one. And it's good that that has been allowed to happen. You also get the role of Batman calls for basically a brooding, silent presence most of the time, and Pattinson carries that off in his own way. But in this particular film, there's also the point that, which has been mainly forgotten over the years with Batman, is that he's as much a detective as he is a superhero. The DC stands for Detective Comics, and that's where it started. And he's considered to be a master detective, and yet mostly it's about him beating people up and, you know, going from one thing to another, and that's all they seem to look at. But here, he finds himself called in by Commissioner Gordon against the wishes of just about everybody around, including the police. But he's able to help them out, and he finds things that they've missed and comes up with some ideas that Gordon is able to use. And I think Pattinson does a good job in the role. Now, I know a lot of viewers of these films compare one Batman to another, say whether this one's as good as the next or whatever. You know, it's sort of like along the James Bond quiz, you know, who's the best James Bond and who's the best Batman. And there's a lot of similarities between a lot of all these. And like James Bond, the idea is for each actor to find their place and find a spot where they can call it their own. And I think Pattinson does well enough for me to be able to see that he's far from the worst. He's not the best, but he's far from the worst in this regard. There's been some absolutely bloody shocking things that have been done with Batman over the journey, and some of them you just really want to try and forget. But there's hope here for this series ongoing with Pattinson in the role, and I hope that the team behind this film decides to go for another one. I believe I just saw yesterday or the day before that the Batman 2 is coming out. I hope they come up with a better title than that, David. I think the Batman 2 is just a bit sort of boring. Yeah. But there's enough here for everything to work with. And I just hope they run the old bat signal out again, and we get another viewing of it at some time down the track.
Indeed. All right, very good. Well, I believe it or not, Perry, I have actually seen the movie.
Oh.
But it was all your fault anyway.
Oh, yeah, it was all my fault.
I saw Drive My Car.
Oh, good. Good.
And so you've talked about it on the podcast. I won't talk about it at any great length, but I did enjoy it. I found it a little bit puzzling. There's some issues which I found a bit strange.
Yes.
I thought it was odd that the main character is a theatre director, and he's been asked to direct a version of Chekhov's play Uncle Vanya at a festival in Hiroshima. But it's very strange because the production features actors speaking in several different languages, including Japanese, Korean, and even Korean Sign Language, which I thought was very odd. Although I must say that the performance by the young woman doing the Korean Sign Language, right towards the end of the film, it's a very, very moving thing, which is the end of Uncle Vanya. And she delivers it all in sign language. It was extremely moving.
It was good. It was good.
That's good. So, I won't say you've talked about it, so I won't go into any great detail. But the main core, I suppose, is the Drive My Car focus of the young woman who drives around the theatre director everywhere he needs to go in his own little car, a little red Saab. But and it's really, a lot of it's about the relationship with her, which doesn't ever become a sexual relationship. I don't feel, but they certainly become very close as part of this whole process, and the whole development of that relationship is really, really there at the heart of the film. So, I enjoyed it, but I think I would have understood what he's trying to do a bit better if I were more familiar with Chekhov's play Uncle Vanya, which I think is clearly intended to reflect some of the plot of the outer story of the film. So that I felt I was a bit at sea because of that. So what did you think about those sort of aspects?
Yeah, I'm not au fait with Uncle Vanya as well, but that didn't really bother me terribly much. I mean, I looked on this when I came out of it as being, I think I described it as being the close to a novel that I've had in a film for a long time, because it just goes into an exploration of the guy's the main director is trying to get over the death of his wife, and he's destitute basically until he gets given this task of producing this version of Uncle Vanya in all these different languages. And the odd thing is that he finds out that his wife had been having an affair with a young actor, and he decides to cast the young actor in a role which is not suited to him at all in this particular play. And yet it seems to work. Mm. And the odd thing is, it's almost like, I almost got the feeling, right, he was setting this young guy up. He's got to think, well, I'm finally going to get my revenge now. And the longer it goes on, the more he thinks, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I just don't want to do that. And he changes over the journey. It's a long, slow film.
Yeah, yeah.
But I didn't find it long and slow. I'm just saying that a lot of people would say, well, it's over 3 hours. I'm not going to sit and watch that. I didn't realise it was 3 hours when I finished. But I'm absolutely certain there's a whole lot of flags, cultural flags, that have been waved in my direction in this film that I'm completely missing because I don't know what they signify. Mm. The colour of the red of the Saab that he drives is a shockingly bright lipstick red that stands out in the landscape everywhere he goes, and it's so obvious in the film all the way through that it must be a metaphor for something, but I don't know what it is.
It's interesting too. I don't know whether this is part of the metaphor, but the fact that in Japan they drive on the left side of the road, but the Saab is a Swedish car, and it's got the driving wheel on the left side of the car for driving on the right hand side of the road. And so whenever it's being driven, you actually think that's not right. There's something not right about that. The driver's on the wrong side of the car. While he's in Japan. What did you make of the very ending of the film, where the what's her name, Misaki, is back in Korea and she's got his car? I didn't understand that. That was very
peculiar, and I didn't quite know. I'd have to go back and watch that again.
I'd like to read the original story. I think by Haruki Murakami. It's only a short story, but I'd like to find a copy of it and read through it.
I don't know exactly what happened there, and you don't actually, when you get this final little sequence, and you're watching it and you think this doesn't make a lot of sense because it just doesn't look like what I was seeing before, and then you realise that there's real no hints to it other than the signs on the language on the signs on some of the buildings.
The number plate on the car's changed. That's what
has it? Oh, well,
threw me initially.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
And all if I did, I'd forgotten it. But it's just a number of little things that there, and I'm not entirely sure what it signifies.
Interesting. Certainly, lots of food for thought. But that's true of most of Murakami's books. Have you read much Murakami?
No, I haven't. I haven't read anything. So.
We should read at least. You should read at least Norwegian Wood.
Yeah.
Murakami was a big fan of the Beatles.
Oh yes.
So Norwegian Wood, of course, is also based on a title of, as this is a title of a Beatles story.
Song.
A Beatles song.
I've told you before, I've got some really big, massive holes in my reading history, and this guy's one of them. And every now and again, I pick something up and go, "Yeah, I must read this." Then put it down again. Don't come back to it again. But I must do it at some point. Sometimes
I wouldn't recommend that you start as I did. I wouldn't recommend that you start with 19Q4.
Oh, okay.
Which is massive. It's like 1,000 pages in print.
Oh no.
Yeah. It's like in 3 parts, but that's very interesting, a very strange book.
I'll try. I'll start off with some of his short stories and his and Norwegian Wood, as you say. Has he won the Nobel Prize?
I don't
believe
so.
He has.
No,
I think he's.
No.
I think he's one of those eternal. He's up there on all the bookies lists every time. So he must be about due. I would have thought.
It's certainly
just from what I know. I mean, I'm not talking from my reading experience, just purely and simply from what everybody says about him, and they all say that he's just absolutely spectacularly wonderful. So, I'd better do the right thing and get out there and read it, David.
Yeah. He's very prolific because he's written a lot of books. Yeah.
He does.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Good
All
stuff.
right. Okay. Well, I think we're done.
I think
I've got nothing else that I want to talk about today, which I probably think the listener is very happy about. So I can shut up and they can go back to doing whatever they were doing, and they don't have to listen to us.
Indeed.
But then they can wait for our next episode, David, which we're going back to the Hugo Time Machine.
We are,
and we're going to look at
polish up its valves and things. I think get it to go again.
Yeah, it's been a while since
Clean
it's
up
been a
the
bit of a
boiler.
run. And we're up to the 1970 Hugo Awards this time, David. So we shall see what happens with the 1970s. So this is the end of the 1960s because it deals with works published in 1969. And we're going strictly on a calendar basis here with the 1960s and I'm talking about 1960 to 1969. People can say, well, the 60s started in 1961. Well, say whatever you bloody like. It doesn't have a 6 in the front of it. How can it be the 60s? That's what I say. So this will finish this particular decade.
Indeed.
So we'll have to have a bit of a think about what was best overall for that decade as well. But anyway, we'll be talking about the 1970 Hugo Awards in our next outing.
Indeed.
So until then, David, you better get reading.
I've got to read all the novels between now and then. Mostly they're short.
Yes,
okay.
Which is a good thing. All right, thanks, David.
Catch you in 3 weeks.
Yeah, see you, mate.